Sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test them, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Father Paul for all of his hospitality. He's been really wonderful. You're very lucky to have him, right? You all know that, yeah. Just one last thing, if you could take me to the airport, you know. That was the build-up, you know. So. About 30 years ago, I was a parish priest in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for many, many years. And I remember one Sunday, after the 10:30 Mass, I was out in front of our church greeting the people, and all of a sudden, this man came up to me, full of intensity. I've never since met a more passionate person. Turned out to be the founder of Food for the Poor, the reason I'm here this morning. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, Father Gus, how would you like to meet the Lord Jesus Christ in person?" If someone come up to you and said, "How would you like to," what would you say? Sure? So, well, then he said, there's 20 students going on a pilgrimage to Haiti, and we don't have a chaplain yet. Would you mind being the chaplain? Well, I couldn't think of a way to get out of it, so I ended up going. And I can witness to you 30 years later that short little 7-day pilgrimage turned out for each and every one of us to be the most profound, the most unbelievable, the most unforgettable experience I've ever had in my lifetime. And so we went. It was the first time any of us had ever been outside the United States. We all found out, in the most radical way I can imagine, what this world is really like. Very first day we went to Haiti. We went to the capital, Port-au-Prince, and we stayed in this nice hotel. But the next morning, early in the morning, we went down the lobby. They put us all on a bus, and they immediately took us right off the bat to the worst slum in the entire world. A world-notorious slum called the City of Soleil, which in French means the City of the Sun. And I can assure you, I don't care where any of us have ever been in the United States, you couldn't point to one spot in the United States. Wouldn't at least prepare us for what we're about to see? Cité-Soleil is a little city in the big city of Port-au-Prince, and it's right on the water, and it's 2 square miles. Now, 2 square miles is a very small little geographical area, but it's hard to imagine. So the way I always suggest is think of the littlest town you've ever been in America. Now, maybe you've always been city folks, you haven't traveled around, but I'll give you an example of what I mean by a little city. This past year, I was in North Dakota, 6 miles from the Canadian border in a little town called Wales. And the reason I remember it is because Saturday night when I went to the first Mass, I went to this little tiny church. I went inside, and before Mass, there were some people milling around. So I went up and I asked a lady, I said, so how many people live here in Wales? And she looked up at me and says, oh, somewhere between 20 and 50, you know? Now that's what I call a little town. So as I said to the people in Wales, and this is my point, I said, supposing tomorrow morning you woke up and found out that your population right now is we're sitting here in Buffalo, New York, right? I called it Brooklyn at the last Mass. So right here in Buffalo. We're in Buffalo, right? Okay. 150 miles off of the border of the United States, in the Cité-Soleil, lives not 50 people, but at this exact moment, 850,000 people in 2 square miles. You cannot believe the scene. And as soon as you get off the bus to begin this pilgrimage, all of a sudden, every one of your senses is assaulted, especially your sense of smell. Now, just that word gives us all away in America. Because I'd be willing to bet there's not one person sitting in this church, including myself, for whom smell means anything at all. Is it ever a problem? Do we ever talk about it? I mean, for most of the year, I live in the backwoods of Tennessee. The only thing I smell all day long is coffee. That's about it. What else is there, you know? And you know what's interesting? When I look out, and this is true anywhere in America, and I look out at the congregation and I see someone smiling and shaking their head like this, I figure military. Because, and I get myself in trouble for saying this, but I always preface it by saying by and large, because there are exceptions, I understand that. But by and large, it is the military in the United States that knows what smell means. You know why? Because when they go overseas, they don't go to vacation spots. They go to the worst places in the world. And so they know what smell means. For example, last summer I had just come back from Haiti. I was in South Florida, and I was just on a mission trip, and the first thing I mentioned at the church was the smell. Because if you go on a mission trip to Haiti, the very first thing that will overwhelm you is the smell. So anyway, and of course you can't describe a smell, right? You know, you either know what it is or you don't. So anyway, after Mass, this young guy came up to me, he was in the Coast Guard. He said, Father, I know exactly what you're talking about. And he told me this. Imagine, you can't imagine this. You're going to have a total blank face. He told me that sometimes, and he's talking about the Coast Guard, as far offshore, and he's talking about Haiti, as 10 miles out in the water, sitting in their boats in the middle of the ocean, and every once in a while they get a whiff of the stench from the mainland. 10 miles out in the water. How is that even possible? Well, go back to Cité-Soleil, because it's right on the water. 2 square miles, 850,000 people. And one of the things you notice about Haiti, and I've been there so often, is there's nowhere in Haiti, I don't care where you go in Haiti, north, south, east, west, where people live in houses. There are 10 million people in Haiti, and no one lives in a house. There are no houses. The only thing I can describe what they live in is a hovel. Now, when I say they don't live in a house, I mean what you and I mean by a house. For example, is there anybody here sitting in this church that doesn't have a front door? Is there anybody that doesn't have a living room? Is there anybody that doesn't have bedrooms? Is there anybody that doesn't have floors? Is there anybody that doesn't have a kitchen? And getting back to the smell, is there anybody that doesn't have a bathroom? Because in the Cité Soleil, all these 850,000 people are squeezed in these hovels right up against one another, no privacy, and of course no indoor plumbing. So I'm explaining the smell, so you can put that together, right? Plus the fact, as soon as you get off the bus and begin meandering around the Cité Soleil, all of it, no sooner do you go down a dirt road than there's a big heap of garbage. And I remember this was 30 years ago when we were there, one of the students came up to me and he was looking all around and he said to me, he said, "Hey," he said, "what's all this garbage all over the place?" I said, "I don't know." See, we didn't know where we were. So let me ask you folks a question. Why do you think right now as we're sitting here, there would be 850,000 people squeezed into 2 square miles? Why would that be? I asked that question this past year, and the deacon in back of me shouted out, "They're there to get something to eat." And I said, "You were in the military, weren't you?" And he said, "Yes." See, most military people would know the answer to that. Not because there's not enough land. There's plenty of land in Haiti. You know why those people are there? Because Cité Soleil is the garbage dump of Port-au-Prince. They are there because they are that desperate and that hungry. They go to Cité Soleil because at least they know one thing for sure. And when we go on a mission trip, when we're in the Cité Soleil, we wait for this to happen because it's an amazing sight. At 3 o'clock, like clockwork, the garbage trucks come rumbling in from the big hotels with the food that you and I scrape off our plates. Who of us doesn't do it? I do it myself. Dump it in the city of Soleil, and that's the food for the people. Not for one meal, but probably for every meal for their entire lives. So, I'll never forget saying that in a very wealthy parish in New Jersey about a couple of years ago. And after Mass, a lady came up to me and said, "Well, Father, after a while they get used to all that." I said, "Oh, no, they don't. They're human beings just like you are." They might, for example, if their child comes up crying out of hunger, they might have to reach into that garbage and pull out a rotten piece of fruit to give to them. They might have to do it, but they don't get used to it. So when you hear, I have heard the most amazing comments. When you hear something like that, I feel like saying, I don't say it, but I'm thinking it. You go to Cité Soleil and you stay there for a week, and you come back and see what you would say, right? So, when you go on a mission trip, you see things that shock you to your foundations. And that's really how Food for the Poor got started. It got started 35 years ago by the wealthiest Catholic family in Jamaica, the Mafoods. Big business people. There's shippers amongst everything else. And they work in the Caribbean and Central America. But 35 years ago, they had been to every country except Haiti. So they send their youngest brother there to stir up some business. So he goes. He was so shocked at what he saw, he went back home and asked his family, which is a big family, big wealthy family, if they'd do something about it. So they did. They founded Food for the Poor. And I've been with them almost from the beginning 30 years ago. And I've been in so many of the different countries that we work. When I say we, I mean we Americans work in. And over the years, I have concluded, and I think most people, if you're in these countries long enough, would conclude the same thing, that Food for the Poor is not the answer. Oftentimes people will say to me, Food for the Poor is not the answer to all this. I say, I know it's not. Do you know what it is? Does anybody know what the answer is? There is no answer, right, that I know of. So you do as best you can. You do what you can. You do something. Praise God, I mean, they at least do something. And I can put my life on the line and say that everything that Food for the Poor says they do, they actually do. It's not much, I mean, in the long run, but it's something. One of the things I think we misunderstand is that the Gospels do not look down upon the poor. In fact, the poor are lifted up. We are not trying to help the poor. We're trying to help those who are below the poor. They're not even at the poverty level. They're in absolute need of they don't even have the basics. Most people we deal with don't eat a meal every day. They don't even have that. So what we're trying to do is raise people up from lacking even the basics to the level of poverty. And poverty means you have all the basics you need, but nothing more. Now that's a blessed state. And the older I get, the less you need. I don't know, you might not think so, but the older you get, you think, oh, what do I have to clean this thing now, But anyway, you know what I mean. But so Food for the Poor, we're not trying to eliminate poverty, but bring people up to the level of poverty. At least that. So there's not going to be a second collection this morning for Food for the Poor, but what we'd like you to do is take our little brochures home. Me and Father Paul put these brochures at the end of the pews. If you happen to be the person at the end of the pew and there's someone in the middle, would you be so gracious as to pass them down? And if you open the brochure, you see, how do you open this thing? I got that wrong. Oh, yeah. If you open the brochure, it tells you what various donations can accomplish. And they're all wonderful, every one of them. But I only want to mention two. And the first one I'm going to throw out there is I realize, first of all, that most people cannot do this. I understand, because it's a lot of money. But it's so critical, I mention it at every Mass that I preach, and that is the house. Because what we have discovered at Food for the Poor, if an American really wanted to do something spectacular, materially speaking, for the poor, for just one family that would otherwise live in total squalor their entire family existence, is to get them a little house. And you can see the difference between, actually, I don't know why they put that picture in there, because actually that looks better than most of the things I've ever